Some people believe every person has a price. That night, the most powerful man in the room was about to discover the one thing money could never buy. The Bella Vista room shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm golden light across polished marble floors, where executives toasted million-dollar deals and celebrities laughed over vintage wine that cost more than most families earned in a month. White-gloved servers floated silently between tables, trained to become invisible the moment a guest looked away. Among them moved Alicia Brooks, a 28-year-old black waitress whose calm eyes missed nothing even while she appeared to notice everything. Her black uniform was perfectly pressed despite working a double shift. Her polished shoes hid the ache in her feet after nearly 14 hours on them, and the small silver watch on her wrist had belonged to her father, the only luxury she allowed herself to wear. She greeted every customer with the same quiet respect, whether they ordered sparkling water or the restaurant's most expensive steak, because somewhere along the way she had learned that dignity should never depend on the size of a paycheck. At the center of the private dining room sat Dominic Romano. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal Italian suit tailored with impossible precision, he carried himself with the effortless confidence of a man rarely told no. His reputation traveled into every room before he did. People lowered their voices when he entered. Managers personally checked every detail of his reservations. Staff whispered stories they could never verify, but never dared dismiss. Tonight he had spent hours hosting an elegant dinner with business associates whose laughter grew louder with every course, while Alicia served each plate with flawless professionalism, never lingering long enough to invite conversation. She noticed the subtle things instead. Dominic always thanked whoever poured his coffee. He never interrupted someone while they spoke. Yet everyone around him still seemed slightly nervous, as though invisible gravity followed him wherever he walked. When dessert ended, the table slowly emptied, expensive. Watches disappeared beneath tailored sleeves, chairs slid backward across polished stone, and guests exchanged handshakes before drifting toward waiting luxury sedans outside. Alicia approached quietly to collect the leather check presenter. She opened it without looking directly at the guest, exactly as she had been trained, but her fingers froze the instant she saw the receipt. The total came to just over $800. Beneath it, written in deliberate black ink, rested a tip of $20,000. For one suspended heartbeat, the entire restaurant seemed to disappear behind the sound of her own breathing. Nearby servers noticed the number and exchanged stunned glances. One busboy nearly dropped a tray. Even the floor manager stopped walking. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Alicia slowly closed the presenter, lifted it with steady hands, and walked back toward Dominic before he reached the exit. Every conversation within earshot faded into silence. Dominic turned as she approached, expecting another polite thank you. Instead, Alicia extended the presenter toward him with both hands and offered a respectful smile that carried neither fear nor excitement. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly. "I can't accept this." Dominic looked first at the untouched receipt, then into her unwavering eyes. For the first time in years, someone had returned his money without hesitation. 5 minutes later, the entire VIP floor would be cleared because the most powerful man in the building wanted one private conversation with the only person who had ever refused his generosity. Alicia followed the floor manager through a quiet hallway lined with framed black and white photographs of the restaurant's earliest days, each polished frame reflecting the soft amber lights overhead. Every step echoed gently against the hardwood floor, yet her heartbeat remained steady. She had replayed the last few minutes in her mind more than once, searching for a mistake she might have made, but every answer brought her back to the same simple truth. She had only protected something her father had taught her could never be replaced. The manager stopped outside an elegant private lounge and lowered his voice. "Mr. Romano is waiting inside." Alicia thanked him politely before opening the door herself. The room was surprisingly simple compared to the extravagant dining hall. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glowing skyline. Leather chairs faced a fireplace that had not been lit, and a single crystal glass rested untouched beside a pitcher of water. Dominic Romano stood near the window with his hands resting loosely in his pockets. He turned as she entered, studying her with the same calm attention he had shown throughout dinner. There was no anger on his face, no impatience, only genuine curiosity. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Please, sit down. Alicia remained standing for a brief moment before accepting the invitation. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence felt thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. Dominic finally broke it with a question so direct that it surprised even himself. Who taught you to refuse $20,000? Alicia blinked once, then smiled almost imperceptibly. It was not the question she expected. She had prepared herself to explain restaurant policy, professionalism, or even apologize if she had somehow offended him. Instead, he had asked about the lesson behind her decision. She folded her hands neatly in her lap before answering. My father did. Dominic nodded but said nothing, encouraging her to continue. Alicia glanced briefly toward the city lights before speaking again. He worked as a city bus mechanic for almost 30 years. We never had much, but he used to tell me something every Sunday before church. He said that money can solve many problems, but it should never decide who you are. He believed gratitude should never feel like ownership. Dominic listened without interrupting. Alicia continued quietly. When I was 16, someone offered him a large amount of money to approve repairs that had not actually been completed. Nobody would have known. We needed the money badly. My mother was recovering from surgery, and our electricity had already been shut off twice that year. She paused only long enough to gather the memory. He refused. That night we ate peanut butter sandwiches by candlelight because the power was still out. I asked him if he regretted saying no. Dominic's expression softened almost invisibly. What did he tell you? Alicia looked down at the silver watch resting against her wrist and gently brushed her thumb across its worn edge. He said, Alicia, there are days when your wallet will be empty. Do not let your character become empty too. The words lingered between them, like music fading after the final note. Dominic lowered his eyes for the first time since she entered the room. Throughout his life, he had watched fortunes change hands with little more than a signature. He had seen friendships measured in numbers and loyalty purchased with expensive gifts. Yet this woman, who worked exhausting shifts and rode the city bus home after midnight, had quietly returned enough money to transform her own life because accepting it would have conflicted with a promise she had made to herself years ago. For reasons he could not fully explain, that realization unsettled him far more than if she had accepted every dollar without hesitation. Dominic remained by the window long after the conversation should have ended, watching the lights of Manhattan shimmer across the river while Alicia quietly excused herself and returned to the dining room to finish the final tasks of her shift. The door closed with a gentle click, yet her words refused to leave the room. He had spent years believing that nearly every decision could be explained by profit, fear, ambition, or survival. Tonight, for the first time in a very long while, he had encountered a decision built entirely upon principle. As he reached for the untouched glass of water, he realized he could not remember the last person who had spoken to him without trying to gain something in return. The realization stayed with him all the way home. His penthouse overlooked the city from nearly 70 stories above the streets, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows, original paintings, and handcrafted furniture collected from around the world. It was a place designed to impress anyone who entered, yet the silence inside felt unusually heavy that evening. Dominic loosened his tie and stood in front of the fireplace without turning it on. His chief assistant, Ethan Collins, arrived precisely at 8 o'clock the following morning carrying the day's schedule on a digital tablet. Ethan had worked beside Dominic for almost 12 years and could usually predict his employer's priorities before a meeting even began. That morning, however, Dominic interrupted the agenda after only a few minutes. I want you to find out more about Alicia Brooks. Ethan looked up with visible surprise. The waitress from Bella Vista? Dominic nodded once. Everything that is appropriate to verify. Employment history, volunteer work, references, nothing invasive. I am not interested in gossip. Ethan hesitated before asking carefully. Is there a business reason? Dominic considered the question longer than expected. I am trying to understand someone who cannot be explained by ordinary logic. Ethan quietly accepted the instruction. By late afternoon, a neatly organized folder rested on Dominic's desk. It contained nothing dramatic. No extraordinary achievements. No hidden fortune. No scandal. Alicia Brooks had worked in restaurants since she was 19. Every former employer described her with nearly identical words. Dependable. Honest. Patient. Calm under pressure. One manager had written a handwritten note instead of completing the standard evaluation. Dominic unfolded it slowly. It read, "If every employee treated people the way Alicia does, customers would remember kindness longer than the food." Dominic continued reading. Alicia lived in a modest apartment in Queens with her younger brother, Marcus Brooks, a full-time engineering student at the City University of New York. She paid most of the rent herself while Marcus balanced classes with a part-time campus library job. Their mother had passed away several years earlier after a long illness. Their father had died unexpectedly not long afterward. There were no luxury vacations, expensive purchases, or unexplained bank deposits. Her financial records showed careful budgeting, automatic savings of $25 every Friday whenever possible, and regular donations of small amounts to a neighborhood food pantry despite her limited income. Dominic leaned back in his chair, staring quietly at the final page. $25 each week was almost invisible compared to the numbers that surrounded his own life. Yet he understood what it represented. It was not the amount that mattered. It was the habit of giving before receiving. He slowly closed the folder and rested one hand upon it. He had expected to discover a hidden motive behind her refusal. Instead, every page confirmed the opposite. Alicia Brooks behaved exactly the same when nobody important was watching. For reasons he still could not explain, that simple truth lingered in his thoughts more powerfully than any negotiation he had completed all year. 3 evenings passed without another conversation, yet Dominic found himself returning to Bella Vista more often than his calendar required. His reservations appeared ordinary to everyone else. Always a quiet table near the back of the dining room. Always arriving alone. Always leaving before the evening crowd reached its peak. The restaurant staff assumed he preferred privacy. Only Dominic understood the real reason. He was observing someone whose actions remained remarkably consistent no matter who occupied the dining room. Alicia greeted elderly couples celebrating anniversaries with the same warmth she offered influential executives. She remembered returning guests by name, quietly refilled coffee before anyone needed to ask, and somehow noticed when a child felt overwhelmed or when an older customer struggled to read the menu in the dim evening light. None of those gestures earned larger tips every time, yet she repeated them without hesitation. One rainy Thursday, Dominic watched through the tall front windows as Alicia finished her shift shortly after 10 o'clock. Most employees hurried toward rideshares or their own cars, but she walked 2 blocks through the drizzle carrying a worn umbrella with a missing corner before boarding a city bus. Curiosity replaced convenience. Dominic instructed his driver to continue home while he followed in another vehicle at a respectful distance, careful not to disturb her routine. The bus crossed into Queens before Alicia stepped onto a quiet residential street lined with aging brick apartment buildings, neighborhood grocery stores, and small family-owned laundromats whose neon signs reflected across the wet sidewalks. She stopped at a modest corner market instead of going directly home. Through the large front window, Dominic watched her compare prices carefully before choosing bread, milk, eggs, fresh vegetables, and a small package of chicken marked with a discount sticker. She smiled warmly at the cashier, thanked him by name, and accepted a handful of coupons for her next visit. There was no trace of frustration or embarrassment, only quiet discipline. A few minutes later, she carried the grocery bags into a 4-story apartment building whose entrance showed years of wear but remained spotless. Dominic stayed inside the car, never considering following her farther. Something about the place reminded him of the neighborhood where his own grandmother had once lived before his life changed forever. The next morning, Ethan placed another envelope on Dominic's desk. "I verified one more detail you may find interesting," he said. Dominic opened the file to discover a letter from the engineering department at Marcus Brooks's university. Marcus had recently been selected for an unpaid research internship that required additional hours on campus. Without hesitation, Alicia had quietly taken extra evening shifts to make certain her brother would not have to decline the opportunity. She had never mentioned the sacrifice to anyone at the restaurant. Dominic set the letter down slowly. He remembered being Marcus's age, believing the future depended entirely on whether someone older chose to believe in you. His grandmother had believed in him before anyone else did, often working impossible hours so he could remain in school. Looking across the skyline outside his office, Dominic realized Alicia was doing exactly the same thing for her younger brother. She was not simply working for a paycheck. She was protecting someone else's tomorrow, one exhausting shift at a time. The realization settled quietly into his heart, and for the first time in years, a business meeting scheduled later that afternoon seemed strangely unimportant compared to the simple strength of a woman who measured success not by what she earned, but by what she made possible for someone she loved. The following Monday evening, Bella Vista welcomed one of its busiest crowds of the season. Crystal glasses reflected warm candlelight, while a string quartet filled the room with quiet melodies that drifted between conversations. Alicia moved gracefully from table to table, balancing polished silver trays with the confidence that came only from years of practice. She smiled at every guest with the same genuine warmth she had shown since her first day, never realizing that Dominic had chosen his usual table once again, partially hidden behind a column where he could observe the dining room without drawing attention to himself. He had not planned to interfere in anyone's evening. He simply wanted to understand why one ordinary waitress continued to occupy his thoughts. About halfway through the dinner service, a group of well-dressed corporate clients entered the restaurant accompanied by loud laughter and confident voices. They requested one of the largest tables near the center of the room, where nearly every employee could hear their conversations. Alicia welcomed them with her usual professionalism, answered questions about the menu, and patiently accommodated several last-minute requests without showing the slightest hint of frustration. For nearly an hour, everything remained pleasant. Then the mood shifted. One guest, a sharply dressed executive in his early 50s named Charles Whitmore, began treating every member of the staff with growing impatience. He complained about the temperature of his coffee after drinking half the cup. He criticized the timing of every course despite the kitchen running perfectly. He interrupted servers before they could finish answering simple questions. Alicia responded each time with calm courtesy, replacing dishes, refreshing drinks, and apologizing even when the problem had not been hers to create. Dominic quietly watched the exchange unfold without taking his eyes from the table. When dessert arrived, Charles removed several crisp $100 bills from his wallet and casually dropped them onto the white tablecloth beside his empty plate. He tapped the stack with one finger while looking directly at Alicia. "You seem like a hard-working young woman," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Pick that up and maybe smile a little bigger this time. You will earn it." The surrounding conversations grew noticeably quieter. Several nearby guests glanced toward the table before quickly looking away. Alicia lowered her eyes to the money for only a moment. Then she gently placed the dessert fork beside Charles's plate, folded her hands in front of her apron, and answered with the same respectful tone she used with every customer. "Sir, I truly appreciate your generosity, but if you would like to leave a gratuity, our policy is to include it with the bill. I cannot accept money placed on the table like this." Charles gave a short laugh, believing she was joking. "It is just money." Alicia's expression remained kind but unwavering. "Respectfully, sir, it is never just money. It is also the way it is given." Silence settled across the dining room. Dominic slowly placed his coffee cup onto its saucer without making a sound. Those simple words carried the same quiet conviction he had heard days earlier inside the private lounge. Alicia was not performing for anyone. She was protecting the same principle regardless of who stood before her. Charles stared at her for another long moment before awkwardly gathering the bills and slipping them back into his wallet. His confident smile disappeared, replaced by something closer to quiet embarrassment. Around the room, several diners exchanged thoughtful glances, and a few offered Alicia small nods of admiration as she calmly continued serving the next table exactly as though nothing unusual had happened. Dominic watched her disappear into the soft glow of the dining room once again, and in that silent moment, he understood that integrity was not revealed during life's easy decisions. It revealed itself when nobody expected you to choose dignity over comfort, and Alicia Brooks had just made that choice without asking anyone to notice. The incident spread quietly among the staff over the next several days, not because anyone exaggerated what had happened, but because nobody could remember another moment when a guest had been corrected without a single raised voice. Alicia never mentioned it herself. She arrived before every shift, tied her apron with the same practiced motion, greeted the kitchen crew by name, and disappeared into another evening of carrying trays, polishing glasses, and making strangers feel welcome. If anyone congratulated her, she simply smiled and changed the subject. To her, there was nothing extraordinary about protecting her own values. She believed she had only done what her father would have expected. Dominic, however, could not let the moment go. He found himself measuring other people differently now. During board meetings, he noticed how quickly executives praised those with influence while overlooking assistants who quietly solved problems behind the scenes. At charity events, he watched donors wait for photographers before writing generous checks. Even simple conversations sounded different. The city had not changed. His perspective had. One Friday afternoon, Ethan entered Dominic's office carrying a folder that had nothing to do with business contracts. "You asked me to keep an eye on Alicia without interfering," he said carefully. "There is something you should know." Dominic looked up from his desk. Ethan explained that Bella Vista's owner had recently announced an internal leadership program. One employee would be promoted into restaurant management after completing several months of training. Nearly every supervisor believed Alicia was the strongest candidate. She had the highest customer satisfaction scores, the lowest complaint record, and the respect of both the kitchen staff and the servers. Dominic nodded, unsurprised. Then she should receive the opportunity. Ethan hesitated. "There is one complication. She quietly removed her own name from consideration yesterday." Dominic frowned for the first time. Why would she do that? Ethan opened the folder and handed him a handwritten request Alicia had submitted to the restaurant owner. It was brief and sincere. Alicia explained that the management schedule would require evenings and weekends on short notice, making it impossible for her to continue helping Marcus while he completed his engineering degree. She respectfully requested that another qualified employee receive the promotion instead because, in her words, "My brother has worked too hard to reach this point. His future deserves my full support for just a little longer." Dominic read the letter twice before placing it back inside the folder. There were no dramatic declarations, no complaints about sacrifice, no expectation that anyone would admire her decision. She had quietly stepped away from her own advancement because someone else's dream mattered more to her than immediate success. That evening, Dominic returned to Bella Vista without making a reservation. He chose a small corner table and watched as Alicia moved confidently through another demanding dinner service, laughing softly with an elderly couple celebrating 50 years of marriage, patiently explaining menu options to a family visiting New York for the first time, and kneeling briefly beside a nervous little girl to reassure her that the chef could prepare her meal without the ingredients that triggered her allergies. Every gesture appeared effortless, yet Dominic now understood that kindness like hers was never effortless. It was a decision repeated hundreds of times each day. As Alicia walked past his table near the end of the evening, she smiled politely without expecting conversation. Dominic returned the smile, but this time it carried something new. He was no longer simply curious about the remarkable waitress who had refused his money. He had begun asking himself a far more difficult question. If someone with so little could choose generosity over ambition again and again, what excuse did a man with every advantage have for settling for anything less than the same standard in his own life? Autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees outside Bella Vista with deep shades of amber and crimson, while cool evening air carried the scent of rain through the streets of Manhattan. Inside the restaurant, the pace remained relentless, yet something subtle had changed. Employees seemed to stand a little taller around Alicia, not because she had asked for respect, but because she offered it so freely to everyone else. Dominic noticed the difference immediately. Leadership, he realized, was not always announced with titles. Sometimes it appeared in the simple way people instinctively trusted one person above the rest. One evening, Bella Vista hosted a private appreciation dinner for a charitable foundation whose donors included business leaders, educators, physicians, and community organizers. The atmosphere was elegant but relaxed, with long conversations replacing the hurried pace of ordinary service. Alicia had been assigned to oversee the main dining room because everyone agreed she could handle even the most demanding guests with grace. Dominic attended as one of the evening's principal supporters, though he kept his presence understated, choosing a seat near the back where he could observe without becoming the center of attention. During the second course, the foundation's chairwoman, Eleanor Whitaker, an admired retired school principal known throughout the city for mentoring disadvantaged students, accidentally dropped a small velvet pouch beside her chair while searching for her reading glasses. The room was busy enough that no one noticed except Alicia, who quietly bent down, retrieved the pouch, and placed it gently beside Eleanor's plate without opening it or drawing attention to the incident. Eleanor smiled gratefully. "Thank you, dear. I did not even realize it had slipped away." Alicia simply nodded. "I am happy to help." Moments later, another guest remarked that the pouch contained a family heirloom bracelet Eleanor had worn for nearly 40 years. Several people expressed relief that it had not been lost. Alicia continued serving the next table as though nothing unusual had happened. Dominic watched the exchange thoughtfully. Many people would have expected praise after protecting something so valuable. Alicia appeared genuinely surprised that anyone considered her actions worthy of discussion. To her, returning what belonged to someone else required no applause. After dessert, Eleanor slowly made her way across the dining room with the assistance of a polished wooden cane. She stopped beside Alicia before the young waitress could clear another table. "May I ask you something?" Eleanor said warmly. Alicia smiled. "Of course." Eleanor reached into her purse and removed a folded envelope. "This is not a tip," she said gently. "It is an invitation. Our foundation is launching a hospitality scholarship for young people who want to build careers based on service, character, and leadership. We need someone to help us shape the program. While watching you tonight, I realized you have already been teaching those lessons without ever standing in a classroom." Alicia looked at the envelope but did not reach for it immediately. "I do not have management experience," she answered honestly. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with quiet wisdom. "Experience teaches people how to perform a job. Character teaches them why the job matters." Across the room, Dominic remained completely still. He had not arranged this meeting. He had not recommended Alicia's name. For the first time since meeting her, someone entirely outside his world had recognized exactly the same qualities he had struggled to describe. As Alicia finally accepted the envelope with humble gratitude rather than excitement, Dominic understood that genuine integrity possessed a remarkable quality. It did not need powerful people to create opportunities. It naturally attracted those who recognized its quiet strength, and once that happened, even the smallest acts of kindness could begin changing lives far beyond the walls of a single restaurant. The invitation remained untouched on Alicia's kitchen table for 2 days. Each time she walked past it after returning home from another late shift, she paused for a moment before continuing with her evening routine. Marcus noticed the envelope almost immediately while reviewing engineering notes spread across the small dining table. "You have been staring at that letter longer than I have been staring at calculus," he joked with a tired smile. Alicia laughed softly before sitting across from him. "I am not sure someone like me belongs in a room full of educators and executives." Marcus lowered his textbook. "Someone like you is exactly who belongs there." She looked at her younger brother with the same protective affection she had carried since childhood. "You still have 2 semesters left before graduation. The scholarship program will take time. If I commit to it now, I might not be able to keep working the extra shifts we need." Marcus remained quiet for several seconds before speaking carefully. "Do you remember what Dad used to tell us every birthday?" Alicia smiled before he even finished the sentence. "Leave every place better than you found it." Marcus nodded. "You have been doing that in one restaurant for years. Maybe it is time to do it somewhere bigger." His words stayed with her long after he returned to his studies. The following afternoon, Alicia attended the foundation meeting in a modest conference room overlooking Central Park. There were no television cameras, no grand introductions, and no dramatic speeches. Around the table sat restaurant owners, hotel managers, culinary instructors, and community volunteers discussing how young employees entering the hospitality industry often learned technical skills but rarely received guidance about empathy, professionalism, and dignity. Eleanor Whitaker welcomed Alicia warmly before asking a simple question. "If you could teach every new server one lesson before their first shift, what would it be?" Alicia hesitated only briefly. "I would tell them that every person who sits at their table is carrying a story they cannot see. Some are celebrating. Some are grieving. Some are lonely. Our job is not only to deliver food. It is to make sure people leave feeling they were treated with kindness." The room became unexpectedly quiet. Several participants slowly nodded while taking notes. Eleanor smiled with unmistakable satisfaction. At nearly the same moment, several blocks away, Dominic concluded a lengthy meeting inside his headquarters. As he prepared to leave, Ethan entered carrying another folder. Miss Whitaker asked if you would consider sponsoring the new Hospitality Leadership Initiative, he explained. Dominic accepted the proposal and immediately recognized Alicia's name among the advisory volunteers. He read every page carefully before signing his approval without requesting a single revision. No publicity, he said as he returned the documents. No press conference. No announcement with my name on it. Let the program succeed because of the people teaching it, not because someone wealthy paid for it. Ethan looked at him with quiet admiration. This decision was unlike any Dominic had made before. It was not designed to strengthen business relationships or improve public reputation. It was simply the right thing to do. Later that evening, Dominic stood alone beside the windows of his office as the city lights slowly awakened below. Weeks earlier, he had believed generosity meant giving people more money than they expected. Alicia Brooks had patiently shown him another definition entirely. True generosity was creating opportunities without asking for recognition. It was believing in another person's character before their accomplishments became visible to everyone else. As he watched the skyline disappear beneath the first stars of the evening, Dominic realized that the greatest gift Alicia had ever given him was never the money she refused. It was the example she never intended to teach, quietly transforming a man who had spent most of his life believing success could be measured only in numbers. 1 year later, the training room overlooking the Hudson River buzzed with quiet excitement as 30 newly hired hospitality students adjusted their notebooks and settled into their seats. Some had never worked inside a restaurant before. Others had grown up believing that serving people was only a temporary job until something better came along. At precisely 9 o'clock, Alicia Brooks stepped to the front of the room wearing a simple navy blazer instead of the black server's uniform that had accompanied her through so many long evenings. She had accepted the foundation's invitation months earlier, balancing classes, mentoring sessions, and restaurant shifts until Marcus proudly crossed the graduation stage with an engineering degree that neither of them had ever stopped. Believing was possible. Watching him receive his diploma had been worth every late bus ride, every double shift, and every sacrifice she had quietly made. Now she carried a different responsibility. Instead of serving meals, she was preparing future professionals to serve people with dignity. Behind her, engraved on a wooden plaque hanging above the classroom entrance, were the words the committee had unanimously chosen as the program's guiding principle. Respect is never included in the bill. Alicia smiled as she welcomed the students. Before we learn how to carry trays or memorize menus, I want to tell you something my father taught me. Skills will help you earn a living. Character will decide the life you build. Every eye remained fixed on her as she shared stories, not about wealthy guests or generous tips, but about patience, honesty, compassion, and the quiet moments when kindness changed someone's entire day. Several rows from the back, Eleanor Whitaker watched with pride while taking almost no notes because she had already witnessed the lesson long before the classroom existed. Near the rear entrance, unnoticed by nearly everyone, Dominic Romano stood beside Ethan for only a few minutes. He had declined every request to have his name displayed anywhere inside the building, despite providing the financial support that made the program possible. He believed the spotlight belonged elsewhere. Ethan glanced around the room before speaking softly. Most people will never know you helped build this. Dominic's eyes remained on Alicia as she encouraged a nervous young student who had just admitted she feared speaking to strangers. That is exactly how it should be, he answered. Some investments are meant to improve lives, not reputations. As the class ended, students surrounded Alicia with thoughtful questions and grateful smiles. She answered every one with the same patience she had once offered customers inside Bella Vista. Before leaving, she noticed Dominic standing quietly near the doorway. For a brief moment, they simply smiled at one another. No grand speeches, no dramatic gestures. Only a shared understanding that one unexpected decision had changed. Far more than either of them could have imagined. Dominic extended his hand. Alicia shook it warmly. Congratulations, he said. You built something extraordinary. Alicia gently shook her head. No, many people believed in it. Dominic smiled. You gave them a reason to. As he walked toward the elevator, he passed the classroom plaque one final time and paused just long enough to read the words carved into the wood. They reminded him of a lesson no amount of wealth had ever been able to purchase. Outside, the afternoon sunlight reflected across the river while students stepped into the city carrying notebooks filled with practical lessons and hearts quietly shaped by something far greater. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.